Good morning, Lee Bratcher. How are you, man?
Good morning. I'm great.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
You came in from Dallas.
Yep.
Can you turn me up a little bit, Danny?
Yep.
Did you drive or fly?
Fly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
Traffic.
Is that the main reason?
Yeah. I-35 is a mess.
I've done that drive before. I'll tell you a funny story. It was the first time I came to Austin. I came for South by Southwest. But the direct flights to Austin were too expensive. It was like 10 years ago and I was broke. And so I flew to Dallas and thought I'll just do the drive because the flight was under half the price. So I drove all the way in and I was staying back in the Omni for one night before going back to the UK. So I put the Omni in my sat nav, set off, and then I stopped to get petrol, gas, what you call it. And I was like, I'll see if there's anything interesting on the way. And I found out that Billy the Kid's grave, or one of her apparent graves, was on the way.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I put that in my sat nav, went to see it, stopped at a pie shop, had pie with this like guy who was celebrating his 98th birthday. And then I put the Omni back in my phone, and I was about, I think, an hour out of Dallas. Anyway, I'm driving along, and I'm about 2 hours in. I'm like, how am I not at Dallas yet? And I started to recognize things. And what I didn't realize is there's like an Omni in Austin. So I'd put the Omni in Austin back in my sat nav and driven pretty much all the way back to Austin. Oh. And then so it took me, what was that, 2, 3, 4, about 7 hours.
That's rough.
I should have flown.
Yeah.
Anyway, nice to see you. And thank you for inviting me to the summit to interview Ted Cruz. I'm going to ask you about that.
That was fun.
You know what the first question is, don't you?
Oh, I do.
When are you going to change it, man? When are you going to become the Texas Bitcoin Council?
It's a great question. Yeah, I think people know we are a Bitcoin first industry association.
Uh-huh.
And your next question is, well, if they know that, then why not change the name?
Yeah. Rebranding is a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. And here's another thing that we think about. So when we meet with politicians, elected officials actually is what the better terminology, we know it's important to differentiate so that they have a clear understanding of the landscape. So we do bring them a copy of the Bitcoin Standard and Inventing Bitcoin. So that's kind of our first step in the educational journey. We've done that with Senator Cruz, with Governor Abbott, with several other state and local state senators and state representatives. And then once the ones that we've had an ongoing relationship with for several years, we've actually talked to them about this very thing. And they'll say, hey, you guys just do Bitcoin mining and other things in the Bitcoin ecosystem. You do a little bit of other broader advocacy for the broader ecosystem, and they'll ask us to keep it the same because they want the largest possible coalition supporting them for their effort and getting educated and that voter block. That's what they want.
So when are you going to change it to the Texas Bitcoin Council? Look, I get it. I imagine for a lot of politicians you're working with, a lot of them don't see the difference. They just see the cryptocurrency industry, and a lot of work is explaining the difference. And I get that because I have the same. Whenever I'm talking to somebody at the football club about it and they've not heard of it, they see it as one big thing. I think for us Bitcoiners, we're like, wow, it's so obvious how different Bitcoin is. It's immaculate conception, everything. I'm very empathetic to people who come in and they literally see no difference between any of it.
It's a little easier for us than the DC politicians, though, because in Texas, mining is such a big deal for job growth, tax revenue. They've heard about it, and they understand, like, oh, okay, well, these other coins don't use proof of work. That's their entry point, is hearing about mining, and so they already know that there's a little bit different.
I was actually really impressed with Ted Cruz's knowledge when we did the interview. Very, very impressed, actually. When I did the interview, a lot of people wanted to talk outside of that and their opinions on Ted Cruz, whether they love him, they hate him, his trip to Mexico, outside of all that.
Yeah.
He had a really deep knowledge of Bitcoin.
So the first time that I met him, we were in DC with his staff, and they had ordered a slew of books with safeties at the top of the list. And I think he read them all. So like he's done an equivalent amount of research that most Bitcoiners have done. For a politician, that's saying a lot because they usually just read the executive summary.
How do you think that interview went?
I thought it was great.
Think it went all right?
Yeah. You pressed him a little bit, but you didn't press him too hard. It was perfect.
I think, yeah. I'd like to interview him again, actually. I'd like to do a proper long-form podcast interview. But I think I said to you before, I would like to get him and...
Ro-Khanna.
Ro-Khanna or a Democrat. Anyone. I just have the two together and just have the kind of conversation I like to have, which is very balanced and gentle and just talk through some issues. But I was impressed. Let people know a little bit more, because not everyone's going to know the Texas Blockchain Council or what you're doing or about you. I know you. I've got to know you over the last year or two. Let people know a little bit more, because it's going to be an important context for the things we're going to talk about.
Sure. Yeah, we're a unique organization. We're a trade association, industry association. So we do two things primarily. One is we do lobbying, education, advocacy at the state level, a little bit at the federal level as well. And we also do business development for our member companies. So we have over 100 corporate members, and we help connect them with various people in the industry that they want to be connected to, and try to drive value for them as a member. And so that puts us in a unique position to both see the industry unfold and also see behind the curtain on how the sausage is made on politics and policy.
And for some people listening, like half of my audience is in America, but half isn't. And a lot won't fully understand the difference between lawmaking at a state and federal level. Is there like an easy way to explain it?
No, there's not an easy way, but I'll say that pertaining to Bitcoin, it's about a 50-50 split. What matters at the state level and at the federal level? At the federal level, it obviously matters if this is going to fall into the purview of the CFTC as a commodity versus that's obviously we're headed that direction, which is great. And then you have things that at the federal level, like tax implications, that is certainly federal, right? The other half, though, is at the state, and a lot of people don't understand that. Money transmission licenses are issued by states. Most banks have a dual regulatory framework, but they fall under the Texas Department of Banking. Texas charter banks do. So there's a lot of things at the state level, including, what are we thinking as a state about central bank digital currencies, about the transactional nature of when is this going to be used for everyday transactions? And that's sales tax, that's point of sale, that's a lot of that stuff is state and local.
So there's a lot you do. You're kind of that conduit between companies and people who are interested in the industry, but at the same time you're trying to protect the industry, you're trying to educate lawmakers. There's a lot you guys do.
Yeah, we do quite a bit. We do what our members want us to do.
Yeah.
And we have a set of values that the members know coming in. And then within that context, within those values and those parameters, we work to advance their interest and advance the interests of the industry and consumers in Texas that are adopting.
And those values are, can you repeat them? Do you know them off by heart?
Yeah, so we have four values. Membership matters, so we want to take the members seriously. We don't want to just take membership revenue and then do what we're going to do anyways. We want to engage them and see what's important for their business. We want to enhance diversity, and that's not the typical form of the word diversity that you would expect. It's diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, diversity of Bitcoiners, right? From different socioeconomic backgrounds or different geographies, et cetera. Diversity of businesses, from like Deloitte to a mining company to a law firm. So to maximize the different specialties that are getting involved in the industry. We want to influence policy. So we want Texas to become the global leader in Bitcoin, blockchain, and digital assets writ large.
And Texas has really started to become this kind of home of Bitcoin now. Why do you think that is?
The ethos of Texas just matches up with the ethos of Bitcoin. And it does in other places as well. So it's not just that. There's also an amazing startup ecosystem in Austin. You've got people that are really driving sort of the thought leadership on the technical side, like Jimmy Song, who are here, on the just kind of the more general business side, like Parker Lewis, who are here. And mining, that was just a function of our free market, energy-only marketplace, which is ERCOT, and the abundance of excess power, stranded power. And so those three factors combined, and we'd like to think that a little bit of our advocacy work on, orange pilling people like Senator Cruz and the governor has helped as well. So I guess there's four factors.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see. You come to Texas, and there are these kind of external pressures that maybe are coming from regulators in DC, or specifically Elizabeth Warren, who we'll likely talk about. But if Texas was left the fuck alone, Bitcoin would just be this industry that naturally grows, naturally continues. That there's no internal questions really within the state. I don't see. I mean, you might know of it, but it seems to me just like a flourishing industry within Texas.
It is, and I think it's not. From the outside, it may look like that was an easy fit, but there's still a ton of education. Still, we did a survey of all Texas voters. Of course, this is a representative sample, 2,000 participants, so a margin of error of about 2%. And this was back in March, so things have changed quite a bit since then. But we found that the favorability ratings for Bitcoin amongst Texas voters is a net plus 10 positive. So that's favorable and very favorable. So it's a net plus 10 on that survey. The ownership of Bitcoin or other digital assets is 29% of Texas voters, which is significantly higher than the national average. Now that data is a little bit skewed because this is of likely voters, not of all Texans. So that skews slightly to the more educated and to the more digitally savvy. So the real number might be slightly under that, but it's still significantly higher than the national average.
And try and explain this kind of Texas DNA, which as this natural fit to Bitcoin itself, because I've been coming here now since that South by Southwest, but really, I would say the last 3 years coming regularly. I've been to Houston, I've been to Dallas, I've spent a lot of time here in Austin. When you spend time here, whether it's going to your summit, whether it's going to some of the meetups, whether it's going to the Bitcoin Commons, or just hanging out, you just also spend time with Texans. You listen to what they talk about with regards to sports and guns and culture. You see that natural fit, which, by the way, I've also seen in Nashville. But try and explain that DNA to an external person who's maybe never even been to the US, let alone Texas.
Yeah, it's a function of history and geography, and there's a sort of a narrative that's kind of in popular culture around Texas, which is mostly just hype and untrue. But there are elements of it that are actually legitimate. I mean, there is a great deal more of sort of independent thinking and a willingness to buck the status quo, and an interest in going out and being more entrepreneurial and not leaning on any external, whether that's state support or what have you. So there is just a different vibe for sure.
Are you from Texas?
Yeah.
Okay, let's get a little bit into the mining and the energy side of things. There is a flourishing mining industry here. It's probably best to talk a little bit about the grid. You obviously know ERCOT very well, the independence of the grid here in Texas. Why has that made this such a natural fit for Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, the energy-only marketplace in Bitcoin sends really strong price signals. And so as we think about, economics and free markets, there's other ISOs, which are different grid operators in parts of the world that have functions of free markets, but ERCOT is probably on the bleeding edge of the free market as far as pricing for energy, which sends clear signals about where energy is cheap and where it's expensive. And so that allows miners to find sites where they can acquire either wholesale PPAs is what we call them, but think about it as a hedged power price in a jurisdiction that's friendly, either partnering with some behind-the-meter generation asset like a solar facility or a wind farm, or just taking power from the grid, but they're taking it at times and at locations where the grid really doesn't need it as much, and pricing is reflected in that, right? If you're going to go to downtown Austin or Dallas or Houston and try to set up a 100 megawatt Bitcoin mine, you're going to be paying, exorbitant amounts for your electricity because those are geographies where there's way more supply than demand.
Right.
So, you're not going to do that. But Texas is so large.
Is it the other way? Way more demand than supply.
You're right.
Yeah.
Way more demand than supply. Texas is so large that you're going to go out in West Texas or in Central Texas or in other parts of the state, and you're going to find that inversed.
And how smooth has that rollout on integration with mining into the grid been? Because there has been accusations labeled at the industry that it's actually drawing energy away that is required. There's been criticism, I think probably unfounded or uneducated.
Yeah, there was some concerns by ERCOT for sure, and there still are. They instituted an interim interconnection process back in March that significantly slowed down the amount of interconnection because at this time, there's 38,000 megawatts of large flexible loads waiting to interconnect on the ERCOT grid. To give some context, that is the size of the New York power grid.
Wow.
The whole state of New York. However, and most of that is Bitcoin mining. But what we had to tell them and what they kind of already knew already, because on the generation side, you see something similar with solar. There's like 10 times the amount of solar waiting to interconnect that will actually materialize. We had to tell them the same thing. Guys, this is load that is, people are applying for load in triplicate. They've got 100 megawatts that they want to build, and they're applying in 3 different locations. So you're seeing that 3 times. It's people just throwing mud against the wall to see what sticks. So the real number that's actually coming is about 10% of that. So once you start to put it back into perspective, it's a little less concerning. And so we've worked with ERCOT through the Large Flexible Load Task Force, which is what the name that they create is kind of a mouthful, but it is mostly Bitcoin mining. And they don't want to call it the Bitcoin Mining Task Force because they wouldn't want to seem like they were discriminating against the industry. But this industry has so much potential to be a demand-side battery for any grid, but especially the Texas grid because we have so much of it and we have so much stranded energy because of transmission congestion, that it could be revolution. It could do for the Texas grid what batteries will do for grids in the Northeast or in Western Europe.
But you said they still have some concerns. What might they be?
It's the speed at which the miners are wanting to interconnect.
Can you explain that?
So a Bitcoin miner wants to get their machines hashing in as little amount of time as possible because they're wanting to capture the machines are the most expensive input. And so if they've already ordered machines, the delay is significant to their bottom line. Other industrial scale projects will take years to ramp up. And that's what ERCOT's used to. That's what the whole world is used to.
So they're not used to this speed.
Not at all.
So is it more just kind of like a nervousness around the speed at which they're connecting, whether ERCOT can handle?
It's a concern around the speed for reliability, but they pretty much all see the same data that we're seeing, which is Bitcoin miners turn off. They're very price sensitive.
Yep.
So whether it's because they've entered into ancillary services and they have a strike price where they have to turn off, or the price of power just sends the price signals are such that, hey, it's unprofitable to mine Bitcoin greater than $100 per megawatt hour. They're all going to be off.
Yeah, what was interesting, we had Sean Connell in here yesterday, and my expectation of this relationship between ERCOT and the miners was like, look, we've got a massive increase in demand. Get on the phone and say, hey, can you turn those off? Because I had heard about perhaps maybe of a concrete plant or a steel plant. That's actually what would happen. It would be a call. And he was explaining, no, the price signals automate this. Yeah, this is the chart we saw. So as soon as the price went up, that signal automated them and they just naturally switch off. So there isn't a phone call that's needed to make. And the really, really interesting thing about this, or the ironic thing I was saying to Sean, is that Bitcoin itself is so volatile, but what it's actually doing is reducing volatility within the energy grid, which is fascinating.
Bitcoin could be volatile by 10, 20% in a day, and it doesn't really affect the strike price that much.
Yeah.
You could even double the strike price and it doesn't matter. ERCOT is only worried about a miner staying on at, say, $1,000 a megawatt hour. It doesn't matter if it's 90 or 120. You see the scale difference there.
You mean the break-even price there by 90 to 120?
Correct. The break-even price. And so if Bitcoin's at $100,000, the break-even price for miners, again, difficulty level is a big factor in this. So the equation, we'd have to know the difficulty level before we knew exact numbers, but it's going to be under $1,000 for the break-even. So you would see the highest I've ever seen it is about $300 when Bitcoin was ripping a year ago at all-time highs.
So we understand their nervousness around it. It's more because their primary concern has to be delivering power to the people of Texas. And if there was ever a scenario where the people of Texas weren't, worst case scenario, there was a rolling blackout, and that was because the Bitcoin miners weren't switching off, we know that would cause some kind of negative PR.
Absolutely.
But that's a nervousness. Do ERCOT as a whole see Bitcoin as this kind of revolutionary technology that they're very fortunate to now have as part of the grid? Do they really appreciate it?
Some do. Most don't yet. Most think about it as this is a tool in the tool belt, in their tool belt for compressing the duck curve, for having more flexible load that's going to pick up the valleys of the duck curve overnight and during times when we're not using a lot of electricity, but it's going to shave the peaks off the top during peak times at 4 p.m. on August 1st when it's just blazing hot in Texas.
But you understand this has made a huge difference.
Huge difference. And I think the potential for it to make an even greater difference when the communication is even better than it is now. Right now, we still get a call every now and again. So on Christmas Eve, Danny and I were talking about this. On Christmas Eve, when the Arctic blast was coming through, I got communication from ERCOT saying, "Hey, we still see some miners on. They can't tell you obviously who because it's proprietary information, but I said, all right, well let me think about it. Let me think who it might be. Let's call me back in 15 minutes." And then turns out the price continued to go up, and those miners did turn off. It was just a slight lag. And so there was a little bit of a concern for a moment, but it was quickly dissipated.
You can see the the hash rate dropped by like 25% or something in a day.
I mean, they're thinking ahead, whereas the system kind of worked perfectly.
It worked perfectly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And so I know you're operating here in Texas, but do we know if I know the rest of the grid is interconnected and there's kind of complicated relationships between who kind of manages which parts, but are other parts of the grid now looking at this? Are they aware? Are they inquiring, coming to visit?
They are. And there are they're capable. There's some ISOs that couldn't, like the California ISO just wouldn't make sense based upon how their market is set up.
ISO? Independent something?
Now you're going to catch me.
Is that like an energy operator?
It's the grid operator.
Yeah, okay. And it wouldn't make sense for California because
their market is a little bit more regulated. It's more of a you have a capacity market there, so the price signals don't work the same way.
Okay,
but in other parts of the country, even with interconnected grids, there's different ISOs, and Danny's probably going to
independent system operator.
That's what I was going to guess.
But would you argue that the California ISO is poorly structured? Or is it something specific for them? I don't know.
So for someone who believes that markets are not perfect, but they can send really good signals and are the way that we should go, yes, the California ISO is poorly structured. They're leaving money on the table. Their citizens are paying more for their energy than they should.
Than they need to. Yeah. Interesting. So, but other, have there been visits down here by other ISOs? I'm using that term like I know what it is now, but
I think there's been Zoom calls. I don't know if there's been visits.
But there's definitely an interest.
Yeah.
And what do we have it here? It's 25% of the Bitcoin hash rate might end up in Texas by the end of this year.
I think that might be a little strong, but 20% would be my current estimate.
Where did you get your 25% from?
I think that was from your tweet, to be honest.
No, I did tweet that about 2 years ago.
Okay. So you think about 20% now?
Given the slowdown from ERCOT and the market slowdown, I think it's probably more going to be like 20%.
That's quite a density of the hash rate in a small location, and that could grow. And if the US grid rapidly adopts this, we could see a massive amount of the hash rate here within the US, which I see trade-offs, right? Firstly, I think regulatory protection, which is great. But then I also see potential regulatory capture. So there's like these big trade-offs. Do you ever consider, are you thinking about, could we end up with too much hash rate here?
I don't think so, because these companies are all very independent competitor countries or companies, and you have different states that are competing. By the way, the Foundry numbers, Foundry's a great company. They put out great products, but a lot of the Texas miners aren't using them as a pool.
Okay.
So that's why Georgia is oversampled in their numbers.
Okay.
People are like, Georgia is the largest state for Bitcoin mining in the U.S. It's because of they're using the Foundry pools numbers.
It's really interesting because who was it we were talking to about incentives? Do you remember?
No, I
kept
can't
coming up.
remember.
We talked about incentives and why incentives matter. And one of the really interesting things, was it Colorado that firstly decriminalized marijuana and then I think made it legal?
They were one of the first states.
Yeah. And I seem to remember something like $1 billion saying in tax revenue came in, and then very quickly other states switched. And all that history of, drugs are bad and marijuana's bad kind of dissipated. And look, I know not every state has changed. I think even here in Texas, it's still illegal, but the incentives matter. Yeah. In a period where there's a massive amount of people looking at energy in the energy sector, especially in Europe, because we've got our own issues. When you have something which stabilizes the grid, brings jobs, brings revenue into the country, lowers energy prices, it becomes very difficult for people to make a solid argument against it.
Yeah. So the one thing, everything you said is true, but the one thing that it's most difficult to prove is the energy price piece. Because from the outset, you increase demand, you're going to increase the price. Miners are using more power, so the price should necessarily go up. And that is true in just a general sense. However, it's really about the geography and the time of day. So I would envision a future where a miner is playing that energy arbitrage, they're monetizing their optionality, and they're turning off 45 minutes a day, every day in the summer, and some days in the winter. And so it's not about the general consumer is like, well, they're using energy, that's bad. It's 100% about where and when.
Okay.
Because we want them to use a lot of energy at 2 a.m. Because if they don't, then we'll have a lot of power plants go out of business.
Or the prices will go up, though, Lee, because what will happen is they won't go out of business because you will need the energy.
Well, so the combined cycle plants need those. They need to make their money because they have to run 24/7. They lose money if they start to power down. Right?
But what would happen to them if they went out of business?
Then you'd have higher prices for the consumer because there'd be less supply.
So you've just made the argument back that actually it does lead to lower prices, or it prevents higher prices.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It can prevent higher prices, but it's a little counterintuitive.
Yeah.
You have to see that the miner is using energy at times and in locations where you're supporting increased generation and you're supporting that generation to stay online and stay efficient. It's more about efficiency of the grid and transmission congestion than it is about the market.
Yeah, I'm just going to push back because you said you would see these companies go out of business, therefore the consumer will see higher prices.
Well, so the generators go out of business.
Yeah.
So if a natural gas generator goes out of business, and they say represent 5% of generation in Texas, then you'll necessarily have 5% less generation available for consumers and could conceivably see an increase in price because of that.
So Bitcoiners are keeping the price. Bitcoiners are keeping the price down. do you see what I'm saying, Danny?
I see what you're saying.
I feel like you can't say this, which is fine.
I agree with you, but it is a more nuanced argument than like the common person that's just studied economics would say like, oh, you're increasing demand for power. You're necessarily going to increase price. Because I'm talking about two different things. I'm talking about generation, which is on the supply side.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin on the demand side.
Yeah.
I think a key part to that probably as well is how ERCOT priced their energy and how regularly they price their energy.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of explain to anyone that might not know how that actually works?
Yeah, it's unique, right? They have no price setting authority. They let it function as a free market. So, if you're we don't see this as a consumer because we get a consumer contract with a retail electric provider that's going to price our energy at 13 cents per kilowatt hour, regardless of the time of day or how hot it is outside. But in the wholesale markets where Bitcoin miners operate, it is a floating market. And so you could see overnight prices plummet. In fact, in West Texas, if there's a lot of wind and there's not enough transmission lines to get it to the population centers of the world, you can have negative prices out there. And the wind developers can eat those prices because they have a subsidy from the federal government to operate their generation. So you have about 15% of the time in West Texas where you're just seeing negatively priced power. But in Dallas, power, the wholesale market could still be, it's a different zone. It's a different pricing zone.
I have found this kind of weird paradox in Texas, in that it is a Republican state, and there is a lot of Democrats here. I understand that, especially in Austin, but it is a Republican state with very traditional values. And when the issue of climate change is discussed, I found it tends to be more from the left, and there's some suspicion and doubt with the policies around climate change and how serious it tends to come a little bit more from the right. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah.
At the same time, Texas seems to be the state that has done, correct me if I'm wrong, but had the biggest investment and the most work in developing renewables.
That is true as well.
It's a weird, I don't understand it. Is that just because incentives matter and there's, there are these subsidies and these entrepreneurs here?
Texans like to make money.
Okay, fuck it. Take the money though.
Is it also because of how independent ERCOT is?
It's several reasons, yeah. Three primary reasons. The incentives are there, federal government subsidies, the ERCOT marketplace, and the geography. The wind region of the state we call it the wind corridor. All the wind is there. It's either there or off the coast or in the Rio Grande Valley. And we have a lot of cheap real estate for solar as well, because solar takes a lot more, you need a lot more real estate to develop a megawatt of solar than you do wind. So geography on the wind corridor, when the wind's blowing the most, and then cheap real estate for a lot of sunny days in Texas. So those three factors combined, it's just simple economics. People are going to develop renewable energy in Texas. And, I think that the legislature in Texas doesn't care how they get the energy. They want it to be reliable. So we do need to match these flexible loads when we talk about energy. So natural gas is the core of any grid globally. It has to be. Or, I guess in developing worlds, it could be coal, which is unfortunate. But natural gas has to be kind of that base generation.
Can't be nuclear?
It could. Unfortunately, people get freaked out about that. I don't know why. We know why, but it's unfounded fear. Texas is about 8% nuclear.
We just made 2 shows last week in Nashville regarding nuclear. We interviewed somebody who'd worked on nuclear subs and then worked on the aircraft carriers, on the nuclear reactors on there, and then he's been involved in consulting, and he's been involved with Fukushima. And his argument for it, the way I'll leave it to you to listen to, leaves you in no doubt that nuclear should be a central part to any energy grid, especially if you are targeting a carbon-free future.
I 100% agree. The only problem with it in Texas is because of the market function, it's just not economical.
Okay.
Yeah. Wind and solar are way cheaper to develop on a per megawatt basis. And quicker. And natural gas is also more economical than nuclear.
Yeah. So knowing everything you know about Texas, all the work you guys have done, you've seen the growth in jobs, you've seen the growth in the industry here. When Elizabeth Warren writes to you, who did she actually write to? The
president, the CEO of ERCOT, but she mentioned me and the Texas Blockchain Council in the letter.
Yeah, I remember. When she does that, how are you actually feeling? What kind of emotions are you going through? Because there is that part that it's a function of success. It's a function of success that she cares that much. but she's never at one point demonstrated any real understanding of Bitcoin and what it is. Like I think there are people out there who do make solid criticisms of Bitcoin, like things you should question. Like, you know, hers always seem unfounded to come from a position of ignorance. But how did you feel about that?
Well, you said it. At first, we thought this is great. It's frustrating though, because you read the letter and you're like, there's so many inaccuracies here. There's so many things taken out of context. So that's frustrating. But she elevated us in the conversation as sort of there were three components to that conversation. There was the industry association, which is us, the grid operator, and the elected officials. And to be in that conversation, that's where we want to be. A couple of years ago, that would not have been the case. So we welcomed it. We'd also welcome the opportunity to talk with her about. We did jab back a little bit in our response. We threw a little bit of So
dig it out, Danny.
Yeah. So Massachusetts, we have like 17 times more renewable energy in Texas than Massachusetts. So we put that out there, right? 17 times.
That's not a jab. That's a fact.
Yeah. And then I also would continue to tweet about the power prices, the day ahead markets in the New England, because they refuse to get natural gas from Canada. And their citizens up there are just paying crazy prices for their electricity. So we did throw a few jabs back and said that she should focus her efforts a little closer to home, because they're struggling in the Northeast with their reliable generation, with power prices, all that stuff.
Can you find a copy of her letter? We won't read the whole thing.
Seven pages.
7 pages. Can you summarize what she was kind of saying, asking, expecting?
She asked, it was pretty unprecedented, by the way.
Yeah.
Nobody that I talked to had ever seen a senator from a different state ask the CEO of a grid operator in another state for these kinds of things. So she asked for several things for ERCOT to respond around the load. Can the grid handle it? Is it healthy for the environment? All these kinds of questions. So the load, the grid, and the environment were the three main things that she asked about.
Who is Pablo Vegas? By the way, fucking great name.
Yeah, it is. He's the new CEO of ERCOT.
Okay.
So Brad Jones.
Okay. Yeah. So there's the opening that got me. It's, Dear Mr. Vegas, we write seeking information about crypto mining operations in Texas and the impact these operations might be having on climate change, the stability of the energy grid, and subsidies ultimately paid by retail customers. And the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT, is providing to crypto mining companies to curtail the operations during these times of peak demand. What's really interesting about that intro is that this letter could have gone two ways. It could be treated like a negative, and we want to know what the fuck you're up to. It could be like, seems like things are going pretty well down there. We want to learn from you.
Well, if you keep reading, it gets...
Yeah, I know. And it gets like, any key sections, like for the listeners, you think we should just dig out?
She starts to throw out some crazy FUD around page 2 or 3. But Danny, if you stay there on page 1 for just a second, you'll see the word subsidies.
Yeah.
That was an intentional word choice. Bitcoin miners get 0 subsidies from the state of Texas, right? They operate just like any other load here. There's no difference. In fact, we get treated with a little bit more skepticism because of the speed at which we interconnect.
Right.
So if anything, we have more to prove. So 0 subsidies. What she's referring to is economic incentives to curtail. Well, every grid needs that. You need economic price signals for loads to be more flexible. You don't want every consumer in their home when it's like 100 degrees outside Fahrenheit outside to crank their AC down to 65, because you could literally cause rolling blackouts, right? You need people to be thinking about when and where we're using electricity. So that baffles me.
Scroll down, Danny, to the next one. Let's see if we can find any juicy. They'll be using enough energy to power the entire city. There's a lot of citations. I want to see what she's actually asking for. Oh, wait, these are the questions. So go back up, Danny, just a touch. Question 1. For the year 2022 to date, and for each of the previous 5 full calendar years, what has been the annual electricity consumption for crypto mining in Texas, yada, yada? Now, how many tons of emissions? How do crypto mining companies plan to scale their operations in Texas? What are the crypto mining companies? Is there any possible response to this? This is none of your fucking business.
That's pretty much what they said. So they've responded with a letter and said very tactfully, right? It's the grid operator, but basically they said that.
What do you think her motivation was here to step so far out of her lane?
It's political.
This is all political.
Oh, all political. Yeah.
Okay. Explain further.
I think maybe she has a genuine concern. I don't want to, I do want to assume the best in people.
Yeah.
So I think she has a genuine concern and probably no time to really get educated on it.
So this would be staffers informing her?
Probably.
Uh-huh.
Certainly staffers that wrote it. And so she has a dual motive, right? She has genuine concern, but she also has political points to score.
Okay. Where's the bit where you're mentioned?
Probably have to Control F.
Come on, you know what page and paragraph.
I can't remember.
Here we go. Love this. While many business and retail customers are asked to voluntarily conserve power during these times, there is no requirement for them to conserve. Though some companies involved in ERCOT programs under demand response agreements that pay them for curtailing their operations during periods of high demand. Lee Bratcher, the president of the Texas Blockchain Council, has said of the July heat wave that over 95% of industrial scale Bitcoin mines curtailed their power consumption during peak demand over that week. I mean, they are part of this. They are actually telling what a great story Texas is doing.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool that you're in there, man. Have you got the reply?
I'll find it.
Yeah.
Is that on your website?
It was a press release.
Okay.
The Texas Blockchain Council responds to Senator Warren's letter.
Did she then respond to that letter?
No.
So just went silent.
Yeah.
What can be done to... Okay, let me take a step back. I've talked about this in the show about, I don't know if you heard it. I mentioned him actually when I was interviewing Senator Cruz. I got this email 7 months ago from this guy, Jason Meyer. He said, I'm writing a book, Pete. It's a progressive case for Bitcoin. Yeah.
I know Jason.
And, you know Jason. So I said to Jason, this is great. Do you want to come on the show and talk about it? And he did.
Yeah.
For me, I've said this over and over again, I think this is the most important book being written about Bitcoin for conservatives. Okay? The reason being is Senator Warren doesn't want to hear from Ted Cruz why Bitcoin mining is good, because it seems to me there's very little bipartisan support for ideas. Everyone just wants to fight. And I know we have had, Senator Gillibrand and Senator Lummis working together. It does happen. But generally speaking, and also when I see someone more on the left and they tweet about Bitcoin, or the people underneath repeat all the FUD. So we do not want Bitcoin to be a partisan issue. We want it to be apolitical. Therefore, it doesn't matter how much you hate progressives and you want to fight them. The best people to defend Bitcoin to progressives are progressives. And therefore, this is good for conservatives. That's my argument for it.
I'll read it for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's very useful.
What can be done to get to somebody like Senator Warren and just say, look, just take a step back. Just let's deal with facts. If you had Bitcoin mining within the state of Massachusetts, these are the benefits you're going to get and your constituents are going to get. If people were able to legally own and use Bitcoin, these are the benefits to your constituents. How do you get to somebody like that?
I think you need more data.
Okay.
We got to get more data. And we're working on it. We are compiling data. It just takes time. Because we know these things to be true because we've seen it firsthand. And also philosophically, we know it should work this way. But for someone that's skeptical, that doesn't work. They need to see the data.
Who on the left is kind of pro or Bitcoin curious?
In Texas?
No, just nationwide.
Nationwide. Ro Khanna.
Okay.
Rep Darren Soto.
Okay.
In Florida is strong. My list runs out real quick.
Damn.
Ron Wyden, Senator Wyden.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you found the letter?
I think this is the press release.
Okay. With the nation's largest wind production and fastest pace of solar generation installation, Texas produces 18 times more renewable energy than Senator Warren's home state of Massachusetts. That's fucking brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, said Lee Bratcher, president of the Texas Blockchain Council. Texas Bitcoin miners act as a flexible load that soaks up the excess power capacity during times of low demand and turns off in the hot summer days when Texans use more energy. Bitcoin mining is also helping to mitigate the effects of flared gas, lowering the carbon impact by more than 63% by redirecting that gas to productive mobile data centers. The information that helps set the record straight, Bitcoin mining produces no Scope 1 emissions. What does Scope 1 emissions mean?
Direct.
Okay.
Like, you're sending air through these machines, so they're not actually producing carbon dioxide.
Globally, Bitcoin mining uses 66.1% sustainable power mix, including nuclear power. Bitcoin miners do not receive subsidies from Texas. Blah, blah, blah. Texas Bitcoin miners curtailed over 50,000 megawatt hours in July 2022. Bitcoin miners act as a buyer of first and last resort for renewable generation that is constrained by transmission capacity. Bitcoin miners are either the largest or second largest employer in 3 Texas counties. Wow, I didn't know that.
There's 254 counties, though, so we have a ways to go.
All right, but still, it's a start. In 2020, there were 8 million megawatt hours of wasted and curtailed wind energy in the US. Bitcoin miners turned that wasted resource into domestic wages, tax revenues, and income. Bang, bang, bang. Take that, Senator Warren. I mean, it's just facts. Here you go. Fact, 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 fact. Fuck off.
Yep.
By the way, Pablo Vegas, what a name. I mean, congratulations. Well done. I found her whole letter particularly weird, and I think your response is brilliant. I feel like she should be coming down here to look at what's being done and see what she can learn and take back for her own state.
You would think.
I think her silence. Well, this is where incentives are so weird. This is where I think the transparency of how bullshit politics and media is right now.
Yeah.
In that, maybe it's in other industries as well, but like working in an industry that is attacked so often and people are so wrong so often, it really exposes the incentives of these people.
That's very true. I mean, because like I said, the dual incentive there, it is a pretty strong incentive that she has personal conviction on this, but even stronger is what she's getting from her base when she makes these kinds of accusations.
Which is why someone like Jason's book's so important.
Absolutely.
Because we need her base to understand she's incorrect.
Yeah.
And she is spreading misinformation to her constituents about something that will benefit them.
I've got some crazy data for you that this is like, only our members have been exposed to this data. So putting it out there to the world. Exclusive.
Right.
On this survey that we conducted, Democrats in Texas were more likely to own Bitcoin than Republicans.
Interesting.
Democrats had a higher favorability of Bitcoin than conservatives.
Would that correlate with a similar poll on technology?
Yes, it does. So it is mostly about age.
Okay, age.
Democrats are typically younger. 54% of people between the ages of 18 and 24 own some kind of digital asset in Texas. 54%.
Interesting. I mean, this is going to be a generational shift over there. So do we have good younger politicians coming through?
It's hard at the state level. In Texas, elected officials, state reps and state senators truly have to be a public servant because they make $7,000 a year.
Okay.
They have to have a second job.
Right.
So, they make a little bit more in per diem, and there's other ways that they can make money, but it's not lucrative. So you can't just be 30 years accountant and quit your job and become an elected official. You have to be someone with established business, family money, or you're an attorney where your practice, there's a lot of things you can do, but that makes it tough for young elected officials to come up. And the ones that do make it up nationally are just showboat people.
Okay.
You've seen that. They're just Twitter personalities.
Yeah. What about the staffers? Do the staffers tend to be younger?
Mm-hmm.
So if the staffers tend to be younger, there is going to be a skew towards them perhaps owning these assets and wanting, therefore, to educate. But then would they want to go against the politics of the senator they represent? That's a tricky one.
Well, so the senator gets a lot of signals from their staff.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's necessarily going against. It's just a staff meeting, and they say, well, actually, sir, actually, ma'am, here's a little bit of information that may color your opinion on that. And they have a lot of influence because you think about this senator, he or she has 1 million briefing binders to read, and they're going to take their staff's word for it on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I really just want Bitcoin, because in the UK, Bitcoin won't be something where it's like, oh, if you're Labour, you're against it, and you're Conservative Party, you're for it. We don't have that kind of partisanship in the UK. I see it potentially happening here, but not as big. It's not as big an issue as something like guns or abortion. You can see the signals, but I think there's a chance to avoid it because so many people do own Bitcoin. So I think it's just about the work you're doing, the Bitcoin Policy Institute, Coin Center, all this work being done to just educate people, which is why it's so important that we have you and Coin Center and the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and why it's so sad we don't have the equivalent in the UK. And I think that's why we're being perhaps held back.
I've met a few.
Yeah?
Oh, in the UK.
I haven't met any. But maybe because it's your line of work.
They probably struggle for funding. Because the way these industry associations are funded is a direct correlation to the influence they can have on the policy process. So DC-based associations can make a lot of money on we'll say like the exchange ecosystem, the DeFi ecosystem, the just kind of the broader, what people think about when they think about the broader market. The Texas Blockchain Council is funded 65 to 70% by the Bitcoin mining industry.
Right. Okay. And I guess this is where it starts to get a little bit weird. I think the way lobbying or influence happens in the US is a bit weird because I see the good work you guys are doing, really important good work. Same with the Bitcoin Policy Institute, same with Coin Center. But you see the perverse incentives when you see Sam Bankman-Fried fraud making massive donations to the Democrat Party, which suit what he is wanting to achieve. So you can see how this system of incentives is great for the honest players and the good actors, but also offers perverse incentives to the bad actors.
Yeah, and there's different rules around political giving at state level versus federal level.
Okay.
So SBF actually gave $1 million to Beto, the gubernatorial candidate that opposed Governor Abbott in this most recent election that was decided in November.
Beto, was he the one who a few years ago?
Hell yeah, we're going to take your guns.
But before he did that, he was seen as the first real chance to flip the state blue.
Right.
Yeah.
Because he almost beat Senator Cruz.
He did. And then he fucked it all up by trying to take the guns.
Yeah. Well, he ran for president and said a bunch of crazy things.
Yeah.
But the governor was able to send a tweet basically saying, because people were asking him, well, hey, is this SBF, because he's been an advocate for the industry. Is this related to the things that you're doing here in Texas? And he was able to say, no, SBF just he made bad investments. He gave $1 million to my political competitor, right? So he was able to kind of, shape it in that way. But at the state level, all political donations have to be from private money. There's no corporate money. There's no super PACs. There's no dark money at the state level. Now, there's different ways I'm sure people are using to get around that. But at the federal level, it's much easier because the Supreme Court, protects political giving as a form of speech. And you've got a ton of corporate money in federal politics.
That's fucked up. I get it.
It's a stretch.
Yeah, free speech. The incentives there are that you can distort speech by buying speech.
Yeah.
I think speech is freer when there's no incentives around it. Or more honest, maybe it's...
but who has the megaphone, though?
The person you give $1 million to.
Yeah.
SBF has and various other bad actors have brought a lot of negative attention to this industry. I think, although ironically, I think the FTX thing actually proved why Bitcoin is so powerful and so important.
Because they had zero on their balance sheet and they couldn't. Yeah,
they had zero on their balance sheet. They created a huge Ponzi by creating all these tokens like FTT and all those other weird ones they created. They proved that honest, good money is important, ironically.
Yep.
But that's brought a lot of attention to the industry. And the fear then is that brings new regulation. But you were saying off camera before we started, actually, you expect a deadlock within federal because of the House being Republican and the Senate being Democrat.
Yeah, so we don't, and most observers don't expect any progress at the federal level. So then it turns to the states. The states that are large enough to affect national change are Florida, California, Texas, and New York.
Okay.
So California doesn't have a track record of being able to pass legislation in this industry. There are other states that do, Wyoming, North Carolina, Arizona, Pennsylvania. I mean, great, they're doing great things, but they're just not large enough to set the standard. California sets the standard for the whole country on emissions for vehicles because they pass the most strictest emission rules. So everybody else complies.
Why?
Because it's too cost prohibitive to create different standards for different states and manufacture, So same with exchanges. We think that if Texas acts, and we are working currently with our legislative partners on legislation for consumer protection around exchanges, that would require exchanges to create a plan for proof of reserves and liabilities, Merkle-assisted proof of reserves and liabilities that the Texas Department of Banking oversees in order for them to retain their banking license. And we're doing this in concert with subject matter experts like Caitlin Logg, Nick Carter, even some of the exchanges themselves. We're not letting them off scot-free. They're still sweating, right, in these conversations. They're like, that makes us a little uncomfortable. We're not ready to go there yet. But we're telling them, hey, the Texas legislature is going to go there. You better do it as part of the process, or else if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Can that work with the like bankruptcy procedures that they've done in Wyoming, where the customer gets paid out first? In case, like if one of them goes belly up,
that would be a little bit different legislation, but that is in the same vein. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This would be to try to prevent those scenarios by giving their auditor visibility into their liabilities and reserves.
Yeah. Okay.
With Merkle-assisted liabilities and reserves.
So you're trying to have Texas become the place that sets the ground rules for this industry.
We think that the Texas market is so large, no exchange will not comply nationally because they can't lose 12% of the consumers in the U.S.
And to the people who out there look at Texas Blockchain Council, Bitcoin Policy Institute, Coin Center, and they're like, what are you doing? Just ignore these people. TikTok, another block. Just keep building. Forget about politicians. Stop asking for regulation. What is your response to that?
I think they should just keep building. They have no interest in the things that we are working on, and that's totally fine. We need people like that. We want them to be heads down and building. So that's good. What I would probably question them on, how loud are they being on that? Because if they're trying to be really loud and destructive, they could be harming their own goals by destabilizing the regulatory environment, by slowing, like Bitcoin doesn't care. I've heard many people on your podcast say that in a variety of different ways. Bitcoin is going to continue there's going to be a new block every 10 minutes. It's going to win, but how fast does it win? In what jurisdictions does it win? In what demographics or how fast does it get adopted across these different geographies? Those things are all very political and policy oriented. So my answer would be, love it, keep building, but just keep your mouth shut on the things that we're trying to do to create the level playing field.
Don't bring unnecessary negative attention.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, what else are you guys working on?
So we've got a joint resolution from the Texas legislature that would condemn central bank digital currencies.
Boom.
We've got a lot of support for that.
How realistic do you think there is of a chance of the US actually bringing out one?
I think it's pretty high.
And can Texas itself do anything to say we reject this? Because Senator Cruz is, he made the case when he interviewed it. He is firmly against this, what it means and what it stands for.
I think we can, as a state, influence the federal government because Texas has the second largest congressional delegation, right? So the second largest, most powerful state in DC. California has the largest delegation, Texas the second largest. So we can influence, and I think there will not be a retail central bank digital currency in Texas or in the US. By that I mean direct Fed account for every citizen that's a CBDC.
So Texas can reject that.
We can work with our allies to reject it. I think we can't just reject it for our citizens, but we will be able to have enough influence in DC to say, absolutely not. when it gets murky and when we lose a lot of our Texas delegation is an intermediated CBDC that's between the Fed and banks.
Okay.
So they totally get that there's way too much totalitarian China level CBDC control when you're talking about a direct to consumer CBDC.
Mm-hmm.
They start to lose their conviction on a Fed to bank CBDC because that is similar to what Fed now is.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, how does that differ from what exists now? It just sounds like a more efficient system.
It is more efficient and it's very similar to what exists now. But what we would say, and I think what you would say too, is it is a slippery slope.
Yes, of course.
Sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that is where the real battle will be. We feel like with Texas and other states and even Democrats, Republicans, whoever, people do not want a Fed to consumer central bank digital currency where the federal government knows everything about your financial activity and could put a negative interest rate on your account or could all these things that we talk about quite a bit. It gets a lot less convictional for people, a lot less like fundamental Bill of Rights level style when you talk about an intermediated CBDC between the Fed and banks.
I see zero chance that people of Texas, when they understand what a CBDC is, accept it.
Right.
Maybe that's when they get their guns out.
Exactly. So we feel very strongly that resolution will pass. Now, this is just going to be a signal, right? This doesn't have the force of law because this is a federal issue. This will be a signal to the Texas delegation, to our 38 members of the Texas delegation, senators and representatives, to oppose any kind of central bank digital currency.
Is there any ability to argue against a central bank digital currency through the Constitution?
I think there is. I would hate to get to that point because then you need that case to work up through the lower courts, and by that time it's been implemented.
Huh.
Because they're retroactive,
right?
Cases.
So okay, so it needs arguing before that. I think if you really explain a CBDC to people, nobody would really want it.
Right.
So who is pushing for this?
So I think it would mostly be people who are ignoring the potential control and totalitarian aspects of it, and people who think, oh, this could help us with collecting tax evasion. This will help us with tax evasion. This will help us with money laundering. This will help us with data and collection and things that are probably pretty good things, right? And they would be sacrificing liberties at the altar of convenience, and it'd be bad.
Did you say to me, Danny, there's been progress with the US CBDC, UK CBDC?
With the UK, yeah, something was out yesterday. I'll pull it up.
Yeah, I mean, we will literally just bend over and take it in the UK. We're fucking idiots.
They're sort of kind of moved away from calling it a CBDC as well, which is probably very intentional.
Yeah, because it's associated with
control.
Yeah, what's a better? What can we do? CBDC, Chinese banking digital control. There we go.
There you go.
You found it.
I'm just trying to find it.
Yeah, I mean,
it's Orwellian. That's
yes.
probably the best way to say it.
Here we go. UK Treasury considers plan for digital pound. The government is considering introducing a digital pound. The Economic Secretary has told MPs. The UK wanted to commit to becoming a world crypto hub. Fuck off. Like, literally fuck off. And the government was a long way down the road to establish a regime, I love that term, for wholesale use, payment purposes of stable coins. Blah, blah, blah.
So they're only talking about wholesale as well. Wholesale is the intermediated model.
So this is what Dan Tubb was talking about when he was on the show, Pete. Like that it starts off as like wholesale, maybe goes corporate paying taxes using it, and then it just creeps.
Yeah. The crypto, so we need to have a show in the UK. Like I feel like we come over here to the US and we do a great job in building a podcast, but we're missing our duty to protect and educate people in the UK about things like this. Rogan would talk about this and, and he would create that groundswell against it. We kind of have a duty to be educating people on this, because any one of my friends, you put that in front of them, they've got no idea of what that really is, the Orwellian nature of this. They'll just say, oh, it's a new technology, a digital pound.
Do you guys read George Orwell in the UK?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yeah, I've read 1984.
Okay.
Also watched the film version. Have you seen the film? It's got a guy in it who was a character called Rabsy Nesbitt. Do you remember Rabsy Nesbitt? Yeah, he's in the film. That was just the thing when I first watched it. I was like, what the fuck's Rabsy Nesbitt doing in there? Yes, we are aware. We're, we just don't have this history of independence like you guys do. We have a history of here in the US, getting our asses kicked.
I mean, there's people in the UK kind of talking out. Like Majid does quite a good job of talking out. We need to do more.
The problem with the voices talking out against it, they have a very difficult. You have a very difficult job in the UK at trying to explain these topics without sounding like some conspiracy theorist, right-wing nutter. Because usually, the kind of people who are discussing this are discussing a number of things that we should be questioning and thinking about. But I often put up that I put that meme up on Twitter of where you go get my pinned tweet, and this will explain to you the issue I have moved between the UK and the US.
Is that
you're the perfect person because you're more moderate and progressive.
You see my pinned tweet, and
okay.
this will explain to you what I'm dealing with, because I might be moderate progressive here.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that is like literally. This is how I try and be a centrist. Being a centrist, I'm considered like a screaming woke leftist in the US and basically Alex Jones in the UK. And you do not want to be classed as a right-wing conspiracy theorist in the UK.
Because there's some UKIP people that are pretty out there.
Yeah, and then you get, like I did the Nigel Farage interview, but I'm going to be careful to distance myself to a number of things he stands for and talks about, because the way we're a very collectivist society, and things that are seen as on the extreme ends, we reject extremism.
Well, I wish the US did a little bit more of rejecting extremism.
Of course, but at the same time, you at least challenge ideas better.
Yeah.
We will roll into a CBDC in the UK.
Not even bat an eye.
Yeah, it will just happen. So I just feel like maybe we have a bit of a duty for that in the UK. What else are you working on?
We have a bill that would exempt severance tax, which is the taxes paid on gas that's sold, natural gas that's sold, if the gas was formerly flared and is redirected into a generator for mobile data center use on site. So it's very narrowly scoped, but there is a 63% reduction in the carbon impact from a flare stack to generator.
Right, man. Well, listen, look, I absolutely loved coming to the summit. I will come next year if you have me. It was a real honor to interview a senator on stage. It's very weird when you set up a podcast as a hobby to suddenly find yourself in that situation. But I was really honored that you asked me, and I hope I did a good job. How can people listening support what you're doing? Where do you want to send them to?
Sure. So TexasBlockchainCouncil.org, that's where they can learn. Our policy page has all of our policy, eight different initiatives, so they can go there to see that. I'm on Twitter at Lee_Bratcher. And the last thing that I think is relevant, given that our mind is on Bitcoin mining so much, is we need an American ASIC machine. We cannot continue to buy Bitmain and MicroBT machines indefinitely. Not only are they gouging us, but it is putting that's a big area of risk for Bitcoin.
Have you taken a look at these Intel machines?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No. The Intel chips perform as advertised, but they are having a lot of trouble with some of the control boards, and they're not yet up to snuff.
Okay. Come on, Intel, pull it out. Okay, well, look, we'll share that on the show notes. We'll put both those letters in the show notes as well, and your reply, etc. Keep doing what you do. Anything you need, just reach out to me or Danny, and thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.